So if you guys have been following my channel in the last couple of weeks, I've been really talking a lot about the writers and actors strike in Hollywood. I've also been starting to really dive into what's happening with these streaming services. They've been actually changing their business models, sometimes axing certain lower tier memberships. Some of them are hemorrhaging subscribers. And then also on top of that, we've had this kind of interesting phenomenon, particularly this summer, of these major blockbuster movies that are completely underperforming. If you guys have not been following, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, the recent one that Lucasfilm through Disney just released, was this massive $350 million project, and it is basically completely flopped. Like, just nobody was interested in it. People are not going to it. And it's not unique to that film. There's been a lot of movies. Pixar just released a movie about a month and a half ago called Elemental. I didn't even hear about it. Most people haven't even heard about it. And it really underperformed as well. So when I heard about the strike and the streaming services changing their models and summer and blockbusters and films just kind of really struggling, it started to dawn on me that maybe this isn't just all unrelated stuff. Maybe this is all kind of coalescing into one particular broad sort of pattern we can kind of start to pick apart and try to figure out what's going on in Hollywood, right? And how does this affect us in the sync licensing market? And it actually was funny. The only reason why I started thinking this is going to be bigger than just a sort of temporary strike where they sort of resolve the differences and then go back to the status quo was I've been receiving these emails, maybe some of you guys have gotten them, where it says, how do you deal with this strike, us as music composers and, producers of content for this industry? And it's like, obviously, number one, reach out to any music supervisors or people that you know in the industry and let them know that you support them and all this stuff. And then the last one was like, make sure you get your metadata in order, because once these strikes are over, you want to make sure that your music is ready to go. And it was actually that one bullet point that made me go, is it just going to be as simple as they just resolve the strike and we go right back to the way things were? And I think, no, I don't really think that's actually going to happen here. So I reached out to Trevor yesterday and I said, hey, have you been following this stuff? And what are you guys thinking about this? And, Trevor, obviously, he's a composer and he's an owner of a music library, Get It Done Music. And he's one that I always go to pretty much first in terms of like, what's happening in this industry? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? And what's your take on this? So I had to invite him back onto the channel so we could talk about this stuff. So I guess let's kind of pick it up, piece by piece. Let's start maybe with the summer blockbusters that have been underperforming. Even though many of us in this side of it, we kind of only do, or a lot of us, what we do is TV music. I don't think this is an unimportant story for us to kind of pay attention to, because film and trailers and that whole industry, it's a big part of what we can potentially get into. So if that's underperforming and that's really not doing well, it's something for us to certainly pay attention to. So Trevor, I'll sort of pass it off to you first in terms of the blockbusters just flop busting, right? Like not really performing how they're supposed to. What's your take on that? Have you been, following this story? Give us your sort of 10,000 foot view on what's happening with movies.
Yeah, I've been racking my brain a little bit on that too, because it's strange to watch studios for basically the last 5 years. Like this summer, I think might be the last final, like they're doing all the things. Like they started with like some of the Star Wars stuff started like upsetting fans and they weren't really doing as well as they thought, like the newer stuff. And then it like different shows and movies. And now we're at the point where they're making like $300 million movies that aren't going anywhere. They aren't making any money. And so now you have boards and producers and investors and all of these people losing lots and lots of money per film. And the idea before was, well, the big films basically pay the hits pay for the flops, but it's starting to really seem like the flops are really outweighing the hits, because when we think of like this summer, I think the only hit I can think of is Mario Brothers. Maybe there's like another one that I can't think of right now, but the Mario Brothers one did really well, right? But then you've got Flash, Shazam, Dungeons and Dragons, the one you just mentioned, Indiana Jones. I'm sure there's a ton of others where they're like crazy underperforming. And that, like, if I'm putting my mind in the executive kind of mind, my thought is I'm going to go broke if I keep doing this. So decisions need to be made. Now, what those decisions are, I have no idea. I think that actors and writers maybe have an idea, which is why they're striking, is because what to do next, I think everybody's freaking out. I don't think that this is some sort of things are going pretty good, we want to renegotiate some things, let's have our battle. It seems like chaos is ensuing and everybody's fighting to figure out what's going on, because we want to be like greedy executives making a ton of money, but it honestly looks like they're all about to go broke, right? They're just failing every film and movie and TV show. Like, don't you like think about all the shows that are bombing, right? Like, I can't even name them all. But tons of shows on Netflix and Disney. Like half the Marvel Disney shows are just complete. Nobody watches them, you know. So like, there's this huge part on the executives, the investors, all those, you know, the big fat cats or whatever are, I think, in my opinion, looking to either go broke or lose a lot of money. And then you have the industry itself being like, hey, we're not getting royalties. We're upset about this. We're upset about this. And then there's like this clash of like, nobody's winning and everybody's upset. And I don't know how that's going to resolve, because in the past, I remember when there was the strike, I believe late 2008, somewhere around 2008,
Yep.
2009. It was after the like basically everybody went on strike, but like production ramped up because there was money. So production for reality shows ramped up. We got the Kardashians, we got the, you know, the Housewives shows, we got the Jersey Shores, we got all that stuff because the money was there. There was just disagreements and stuff. The strike was over. We went back to doing movies and shows and all that kind of stuff, but we were stuck with with Kardashians and stuff like that forever. But now I don't know. It feels different. It feels like nobody is happy and everybody's failing, and they don't know what to do. And so there's just strikes going on. There's fights going on. Everybody's, you know, like, yeah, there's just tons of crazy stuff going on. You just Google writer strike and it's just news articles about studios buying and selling, you know, the directors, writers, actors upset about X, Y, and Z. AI is in the mix for some reason. Like, it's just all over the place.
Yeah, and I want to also point out that the main difference, I think, of why I don't think this is just another strike that they'll just settle their differences and go back to work is because the entire landscape technologically has changed since that first writer strike. In 2008, 2009, YouTube was obviously here, but it wasn't where it is now. There was no, I think Netflix maybe had just started some streaming, maybe not. I don't know if they had started their streaming services that early. But you can just feel how different our world is now, 13 years, 15 years afterwards, that Hollywood has to compete with me, right? Me and you right now sitting on this channel. We don't think of ourselves as competing with, big execs in Hollywood, but we actually are, because this conversation, which might be 20, 30 minutes, I don't know, that's 20, 30 minutes that you guys watching this aren't watching a Netflix show. You're not going to the theater to do something. So they just have run into this new reality, which is that their relevance has been deeply questioned in terms of it's not just the thing to do now. Back when we were growing up, what's the thing to do? We're going to go to a movie, right? It's Friday night, Saturday. We're going to, what's the new movie out? It could be even not that great. You're still going to go because it's the movie. It's like, what other things could you do? I guess you could watch your VHSs or your DVDs at home, but you probably watch those a million times. You want something new. So Hollywood had this sort of, I guess you would call it like circle of gravity around it, because it was just like the only game in town. It was just the only option for awesome, new, engaging entertainment. And that's not the case anymore now. So to me, we can kind of now bring in the streaming aspect of this conversation. I think what's happening, my take on it, is that, and by the way, I think I totally agree with you on before we go into the streaming, why Hollywood blockbusters are flopping. I do want to give my take on that. There is something happening with these companies where they are wanting to inject political ideologies or points of view or opinions or whatever you want to call it. It's a sort of go woke, get woke, go broke kind of meme, where they want to inject some sort of probably a sense of morality into their movies. And once in a while, I think they've done that throughout all of Hollywood's history, but it usually sort of coincided with traditional kind of American values. So most people were like, yeah, I like that there was a sort of moral to the story. It lines up with my values. I'm all cool with them putting some morality into the movies as long as it lines up with what we believe. But there's obviously a lot of conflict right now with what a lot of the writers and the executives at these major companies, the kind of morality that they think is the quote unquote right side of history, they're putting into their movies. And you can see the consumer base and the audience is just going, nope, those aren't my values. That's not what I think is important. That's actually not something I want my kids to be exposed to. And so obviously now there's a kind of a mistrust issue happening right now. So before, Disney had this kind of built in, it was an institution, right? It was like your family members and your parents would say, yeah, go watch a Disney movie. We know that they're wholesome. We know that they're fun. They got great music. And we totally trust the Disney brand. That has been severely severed, because I've been looking into this as well. It's not just the blockbuster that's been disrupted, and people are sort of not going to Disney movies or any of their subsidiaries, which would be Lucasfilm, Pixar, or Marvel. But Disneyland and Disney World have been suffering as well. You can go look into this, that their numbers have actually been quite a bit lower this summer, which is supposed to be their peak season. Disney World particularly, you can see videos of people posting it, and it's kind of empty. So it's not just that it's like, well, the movies are not that interesting, we're not going to go to the movies. There's actually, I think, a fundamental trust that's been broken between families, parents, and Disney. So that's a big problem for Disney. We can maybe skip all the things going on with Disney. But now bringing it back, go ahead.
I would like to, so you brought up something interesting about like kind of the go broke thing. But on top of that, because I mean, movies have woke things and the opposite for all throughout history. It's kind of how movies are done, right? But the weird thing in this scenario, though, is that Disney basically bought up nostalgia. They bought up Marvel. They bought up Star Wars, like a bunch of stuff. Plus, the stuff they already own, right? All of the movies, like Little Mermaid, Snow White, all this stuff, right? And then they basically kind of tried to blend the two and instead of creating something new. And I think that backlashed in a way they didn't expect. And similar with like The Witcher, for example, on Netflix, like they took basically a beloved video game, tried to adapt it, but then changed a bunch and then upset the audience. And then they did it with, they're kind of doing it with like Mulan, which bombed. They did it with, apparently they're doing it with Snow White. Like I know that's kind of in production, but it seems like there's kind of this, like, hey, we're going to take what you love. We're going to try and capitalize on your nostalgia, but then we're also going to like change it so much that you're just going to be mad at us. And they've been doing it for a while. And it's kind of a weird relationship they've created where they almost just like buy what you like, then change it enough to piss you off and then go, I don't know. So it's a weird kind of behavior going on that I don't quite get.
Yeah, and not only that, it's not even just so they go, I don't know. They actually sometimes attack the fans. Like I've seen actually like pieces where executives, directors, if the sort of reviews from the common general audience is like, yeah, I don't like the stuff that you injected into that movie, they'll say, well, you guys are just all racist. You guys are just all whatever phobic, right? Insert phobic. And it's like, the lack of, the lack of sort of just self-reflection there of like, well, the marketplace usually it's not that they're like trying to actively sabotage a company. A lot of times it just comes down to like, was the story good, right? Did it really capture me, or did it feel like you sacrificed story and good storytelling and great character development for injecting a message, right? And that's what I've definitely noticed in a lot of films for going way back before all this stuff going on. I think back since 2012, 2015, I started noticing that in some movies. It'd be a lot more subtle back then. I think that's the main difference. It was very subtle. You would just see little things. You're like, okay, I could do without that. And now it's just like right on the front of the screen. It's like, dang, here's the message. And literally the characters will say what they want you to believe and that kind of thing. So you kind of feel sometimes you're being preached at. And it's like, who wants to go to the movie to feel preached at? Like, that's so the opposite of what a movie, I think, traditionally usually was for. It was like, hey, get me out of reality, right? Like, take me out of the politicization, whatever that word is. Everything's been politicized, right? Take me out of that world. Like, I want to get away from all this madness and people bickering. Take me on a magical ride, on an amazing adventure into some other world, into some other point of view and some other thing. And then when I get out of it, realize, wow, that was such a fun, I remember that feeling when I was a kid coming out of the theaters, especially Jurassic Park was my big one. Coming out of the theaters and going, I was just hanging out with dinosaurs for whatever it was, an hour and a half, which, by the way, there should be a law. No movie should be more than an hour and a half. I saw how long the Oppenheimer one was. It actually killed my interest in it. I was really excited for it. I was like, wow, this is like the first movie in years. And then I looked at it's 3 hours and I was like, forget you. Like, out of protest, I'm not going to watch it because I mean, some people have 3 hours to kill. God bless you. I don't. I got 2 kids. I'm running a business. I'll wait for it to go on streaming, and I'll probably watch it in installments, just like a sort of series or something. So anyways, side point. I want to talk about streaming too. Did you have anything to add though on that one?
No, that was it. Let's get into streaming. Yeah.
Blockbusters, failing, flopping, companies for whatever reason are kind of like sabotaging their own content. Now we've got some interesting things happening with streaming services. I just noticed within the last couple of weeks, this week, YouTube Premium is raised its rates. YouTube's also now no longer allowing ad blocks, and they're also trying to get content creators like me to pay to get our content featured on people's home tabs on their apps. All of these things to me say that's not a strong company because they're basically kind of trying to dig out as much little pieces of change as they possibly can rather than sort of just growing or enhancing the service or the product in some way. So I think there's a problem there. Netflix just canceled and cut out their lowest tier memberships. I think it was $9.99 here and maybe even cheaper in the UK. That used to be sort of like the starter flagship offering, and that is now gone. Now you have to get in at whatever it is, 15 a month, 17 a month. Disney Plus is in big trouble. They've been losing subscribers. Like Trevor said, nobody's watching the content on there. It's just causing a huge sort of crisis for Disney because they're now actually so in trouble with the loss of revenue from the blockbusters to the parks not delivering as much that they have now signaled, Bob Iger, the CEO, has signaled that he might be selling off ABC or some other linear channels that's basically been their kind of bread and butter for many, many years. And so I see that in the backdrop of these, blockbusters. It's almost like that was like the next domino to fall. Blockbusters are failing. People are not into this kind of stuff. Streaming services are trying to survive on just subscriptions, and now we're realizing there's kind of limits to that. I think the ad-supported model of the cable and the networks were probably much more profitable. Obviously, a lot more money could come into there if you could allow ads to come in. So the streaming services, I also feel they're probably going to have to realize, this just purely subscriber-generated business model, it'll take us only so far, but what can we do once we reach our limit, once we reach our saturation point? Well, we can jack up our prices a couple of bucks, and that's what you're starting to see, right? You're seeing them cut out the lower ones. You have to do high. Also, the password cut out. Netflix now is cracking down on password sharing, which is what we've all been doing, right? I'll be the first one to admit it. I give it to my parents. I've given it to my brother. I've given it to people. So we share our passwords, of course. That's what we do. As long as you're not saying I can't do it and my account won't be penalized for doing it, we're all pretty much doing it, right? And so they're cutting down on that. That did increase their subscriber count about 5 million, but that's probably the cap of where that's going to go. So it kind of makes you wonder, if the money is not growing and this marketplace is not growing, where is that money going to come from? And of course, that is the next one that'll lead into our writer strike and our actor strike. But the streaming services, I think, are in some big trouble right now. As my point of view of it is that it's sort of in a bubble, and it's really been blown up since the pandemic, of course. But Trevor, let's go into your view on the streaming services and what they're all doing right now.
Yeah, it's a little bit above my pay grade, but I do think that what is something that happened like 6 months ago was interest rates started coming up a bunch through the Fed, which essentially is like free money go bye-bye. And maybe that's what we're starting to see with a lot of these major corporations, is that they're not getting their free money through like loans and bonds and however all that works. That's one thing. And two, like everybody's might have to start balling on a budget. Like you might start having to make movies on like normal sized budgets because you have an audience that's only so big, only paying so much money a month. And you can't subsidize it with something else, right? So I think in the past, the streaming stuff was basically subsidized from years of success in selling $15 DVDs or, TV shows having giant advertising budgets because you had full global or nationwide commercial payments, right? Like a Tide would pay for a whole year to have ads run on FX, and it was a big deal, like a big chunk of money, right? But now that's all seems to be dwindling. You've got your financial system kind of turning off the spigot, and all that's left is to try and get the money from the customer. And you need more if you're going to make Indiana Jones a couple times a year. Like that's a lot of money, right? So it seems that they're kind of starting to get squeezed from both top down and the bottom up, which we're at the bottom up paying our $10 or whatever a month, to where they're going to have to start, budgeting properly and being like, what or at least is what it seems, is they're going to be like, look, we have these tight budgets for these movies. We're not going to make another movie with 1 billion explosions. It's too expensive. Maybe we're going to make one that's a little more subsistence on the content side, where you got to think hard and not watch explosions for 30 minutes because that's really expensive, right? So like there might be like a shift in that type of content where you get your one blockbuster a year and then your cheaper films get made throughout the year to kind of keep the budget under a certain amount, because there's just not as much money going around, I think, is really ultimately what everybody's fighting about.
Yeah, that's a great point. I never thought about the interest rates. Absolutely, that's got to be playing some part of this, because every industry is certainly being squeezed a little bit right now, and we were so used to having that free and easy money. Obviously, that's a big part of this. I never even actually put that together. That's why I bring you on here, man. You always point out the obvious that I'm not thinking about. Yeah, it is kind of exciting, I think, to think about the fact that this change could signal the end of the CGI blockbuster reboot, which is pretty much what we've gotten for the last 5 to 7, maybe 10 years. It's just, here's another Star Wars, here's another Batman, here's another Superman, here's another
Fast and
Ghostbusters.
Furious 15.
Fast
You
and
ready?
Furious.
I'm ready.
Fast and Furious will probably never suffer, though. I think they'll keep going. I think that brand is just solid forever.
Probably true.
They've done something kind of special, actually, with that brand. But I think you're right. It is this sort of thing where, because studios were in a position of like, hey, if we're going to go to the studios now, the marketplace has changed. We've got to make it count. And we got to make sure that first weekend, like that first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, is got to just basically recoup all of our costs and then start making us profitable. So how do you do that as a studio? Well, you go to a tried and true brand, right? You go to something that's already recognizable, a broad audience, of course, superheroes and sort of nostalgia, previously, loved franchises. You've already got a built-in audience, and especially with the nostalgia audience, we realize that like they're marketing after you and I and people a little bit older than us. They're like, we need to get parents get their butts in the seats and then bring their kids. So it's not an unwise move to say, hey, let's get these 40, 50-year-olds back excited about Star Wars, because that's what really defined their childhood, and that was such a part of their growing up culture. And let's bring them back into the theater and let's reintroduce Star Wars to their kids, and then we can kind of grow this brand into a new direction. And that's the strategy wasn't an unwise strategy. It's basically, I think, in the content and how they delivered a lot of that completely didn't pan out that way. The interest in Star Wars is probably lower than it's probably ever been, I think, right now, because of what they delivered. It wasn't the audience. It was just they delivered something that just wasn't really honoring of the previous story, and the new characters they invoked and tried to get you excited about just, I don't think, really landed that well with the younger audience. But now let's go ahead and wrap it up with talking about the strikes. Now, I realize this is going to be a long conversation, so maybe what I'm going to do is we'll have this as a part 1, just sort of laying the land of what's happening, and let's maybe cut this one and we'll do a part 2 about what we should be doing as sync licensing artists, because you have a lot of great points of view on that. So I want to make sure it doesn't get buried in this long conversation at the very end, so we'll do that. But now we've got the writer's strike that started in May. Now we've just had the SAG-AFTRA strike, which is the actors. Started about 2 weeks ago. And the last time that both of those were striking at the same time was in the 1960s. And the reason why they struck back then is because they wanted to fight for residuals. Up until the 60s, you basically got your one-time check for being in a movie or being in the show. And then it was like, bye-bye, see you later. Thank you so much. And they were basically fighting for themselves to say, hey, we need to, like, you guys are getting residuals on this. Our effort and our talent is what's keeping these things on the air and getting them to go through major syndication programs. We need a cut of that as well. So good on them that they actually fought for that and won. So I actually think that's a really cool positive step for writers and actors, which is really good, because imagine we were living in a world where like sync artists only got your one-time fee and no royalties. Well, you better hope those sync fees are really, really nice, because for me at least, royalties are the way that I was able to do this full time and focus all of my attention on it. But here we are. We've got writers and actors basically saying we want a lot more for the streaming, right? That's one of the big contentions that's going on right now. They're saying, hey, you guys have all the streaming content. You guys are growing those. We want to see basically what's going on over there. What are the numbers? How many people are viewing it? That's something that streaming services are not offering, which to me is a sign of weakness. If you're not showing what your company's doing, they're all kind of trying to say, well, we're not going to be the first one to kind of expose ourselves and show the world really how underperforming some of our content is. I think that goes without saying. But the writers and the actors want higher residuals on the streaming services. But the studios, on the other hand, are really kind of going, okay, where are we going to get that money? Because we're not making money. I think Netflix is the only one, as far as I know, that's actually profitable. And they're not extremely profitable, but they are profitable. But all the other streaming services are still in the growth mode, where they're not worrying so much about profits. They just want to get a market share, and then they can worry later about it, sort of following the Amazon model. So what's your take on the writers and the actors strike? Trevor, what do you see this going, and how soon do you think it might be resolved, if there's any way to guess on that?
Oh, I have no idea when it's going to be resolved. I I don't know the specific details of what everybody's asking for. I've just kind of heard a little bit here and there of some of it has to do with like royalty rates going up, because like SAG and after people were getting royalties from TV and film, and they were from like television and film, and they were used to a show getting syndicated on a network that had huge advertising budgets and then getting huge royalties. And the networks were like, yeah, that's fine. We're going to be paying royalties to the music people. We're going to be paying royalties to the actors. We're going to be paying royalties to the writers. We're going to be paying royalties to the studio owner who owns this, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air or whatever, we're syndicating. and the budgets were big enough to be able to deal with all of that and be like, yeah, that's fine. That, like I said earlier in our talk, like that might not be the case with streaming. Like the amount of money coming into streaming just might not be enough to sustain all of that. Because the idea with streaming is there's no ads, right? So you don't have the ad revenue. All you have is content. Now I know like Hulu has kind of got like a double thing going on or whatever, but I'm willing to bet that the money just isn't enough for the services to be sitting there going, we're going to pay royalties for the music, we're going to pay royalties to the actors and the writers and the da-da-da, and then everybody's going to get all the royalties, and plus all the upfront fees for just licensing a show for a year or whatever, right? So like, if that's the case, if the budgets are gone, then, or like not gone, but too small to handle that much baggage, they're either going to say no, and then you're going to have shows that just die because you're going to be like, well, if you want our show, we have all this baggage, and if you say no, then like we can't force you to put it on your network, and then it just dies and it sits in oblivion because it's too expensive to exist, basically. Or the other side happens where like people start losing stuff, like I'm this is a very unpopular opinion amongst my peers, but I am prepared for a future where upfront fees go up a little bit and royalties completely go away, at least in certain scenarios, right? Like some things may offer royalties because they can in certain ways, and some things like streaming services or platforms or whatever may opt into something a little more different. And I'm not as against that as a lot of other people are. I think if I am running a business and I can look at it and go, you know what, inflation's crazy. A lot's going on. If I get a 10 grand check now or 15 grand spread over the next 5 years or whatever, that, maybe the 10 is better now. I can do more with it now, improve my business, whatever, and never get royalties again. That may not be a bad idea. It may not be like I know that's kind of taboo to say to the people who really, really like royalties. And I may not have a choice. That may just be the way the industry starts to pan out anyway. So I think that, like I said at the beginning, a lot of this just has to do with how much money everybody has to do what they want. And everybody's got to compromise, because I don't think that, I could be wrong, but I don't know what the bank accounts look like in the in the studios, but I doubt that the studios just have trillions of dollars sitting there and they're just like, nah, you're not getting any. I think they're running out of money, and I think their behavior kind of insinuates that. So I'm expecting these negotiations not to go too well, and something interesting and different to come out of them.
I agree. Absolutely. And that's a great place. We'll put a little bookmark on that. And then we're going to come back for a part 2 for the next video I upload, guys. And we're going to talk about, now that we sort of laid the land of what we see happening, what you can do. And Trevor was kind of hinting at that. And a lot of it's going to come down to opening your eyes, opening your mind to new ways of doing business and new ways of earning income with your music. So stay tuned. Come back for part 2.